On July 5th, 2018, a call came into Cherokee County 911. The voice on the other end belonged to a man named Scott Ferris. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't screaming. He was calm in that specific way that people get when they are holding themselves together with everything they have. His father, Gary Ferris, hadn't been seen in 2 days. And something, Scott said, was really off. That kind of calm is worth paying attention to. It's the calm of someone who already suspects the worst but isn't ready to say it out loud yet. Gary Ferris was the kind of man who leaves a mark on the people around him. He was the center of his family, the one everyone else organized themselves around. His family called him Big Daddy. That name wasn't just affection. It described exactly what he was to them. He was the anchor. He was the reason the family had what it had. And by the summer of 2018, what the Ferris family had was considerable. The farm they lived on stretched across 10 acres in Cherokee County. From the outside, it looked like the kind of place people point to as proof that hard work pays off. Greenland, space to breathe, the kind of quiet that comes when you're far enough from everything else that nothing can touch you. But that picture, it turns out, was a lie. Not the small kind of lie where someone leaves out an uncomfortable detail. The large kind where the entire surface of something is designed to hide what's underneath. The Ferris family farm was carrying weight that the outside world couldn't see. And by the time Gary disappeared, that weight had become impossible to ignore. And Scott Ferris made that 911 call after 2 days of silence, 2 days during which nobody had heard from Gary. 2 days during which the family went through all the ordinary explanations and ran out of them one by one. When there was nothing left to explain, Scott and his siblings and his mother walked the property themselves. They searched the land that had been their family's home for years. They looked in the places you look when you're hoping to find something simple. A truck parked in the wrong spot. A man sitting somewhere, maybe sick, maybe confused. Something that had an easy answer. What they found had no easy answer at all. Human remains were discovered on the property. The details of exactly where and how are the kind of thing that changes a person's relationship to a place forever. A farm that had been home became something else in an instant. The ground that the family had walked across their entire lives was now a crime scene. And then came the detail that removed every remaining doubt about what had happened. A bullet, lodged in bone. One single piece of evidence that transformed a missing person situation into a homicide investigation before the day was over. Gary Ferris had been shot. The question that followed that discovery was the one that would define everything that came after it. By whom and why? There's a reason that question is so difficult to sit with. When someone is killed by a stranger, it's horrifying, but there's a kind of distance to it. The world feels dangerous, but the people closest to you still feel safe. When someone is killed by someone who loved them, or was supposed to love them, that distance disappears entirely. And in the Ferris case, the circle of people who could be responsible was not wide. It was tight. It was family. Every member of the Ferris family found themselves under scrutiny. That's not a comfortable thing to write or to hear. Most people don't want to believe that the people they grew up with, the people who shared a table and a name and a history with them, are capable of something like this. But the evidence didn't care about comfort. And the secrets that began to surface once investigators started looking closely at the Ferris family made the situation even more complicated. The first secret was money, not a little money. Somewhere between $4.5 and $5 million was tied up in the Ferris family's world. That kind of number changes things. It changes the way people think about each other. It changes conversations about the future, about who gets what, about what happens when the man at the center of everything is gone. Money at that level doesn't just complicate grief, it contaminates it. It makes everyone wonder, even when they don't want to, about motives, about who benefits, about who knew what and when. The second secret was infidelity. And this is where the story takes a turn that a lot of people wouldn't expect, because the affair in the Ferris family wasn't Gary's. It was hers. Gary's wife, the woman who stood beside him on that farm, the mother of his children, had been the one having affairs. Not him. That detail matters because it shifts the entire emotional landscape of the story. Gary wasn't the one with something to hide in that particular area. But knowing that your spouse has been unfaithful and staying and continuing to build a life, That kind of thing doesn't just go away. It lives inside a marriage like something buried, and in this family, a lot of things have been buried. The third secret was jealousy. Jealousy within a family is one of those things that tends to stay quiet for a long time. It doesn't announce itself. It moves slowly, building in the background of ordinary days, feeding on small moments, on perceived slights, on the sense that someone else has more than their share. In the Ferris family, jealousy had been simmering for a long time. Long enough that by the time Gary was gone, it had become part of the structure of how they all related to each other. These three things together, the money, the infidelity, the jealousy, created a picture that was almost unbearable for the people inside it. One family member would later say that what made it so painful was having to put all the secrets out on the table, that there was no way to explain what had happened without opening every door that had been kept closed. There's something deeply human about that. Most families have things they don't talk about, patterns that everyone recognizes but no one names, dynamics that the people inside them have learned to navigate without ever fully confronting. The difference is that most families don't have those patterns end in a body on a farm. When they do, everything that was private becomes public. And for the Ferris family, that meant living through two losses at once. The loss of Gary and the loss of the version of their family they had always been able to show the world. Gary himself had apparently seen trouble coming, at least in some form. At some point before his death, he had confided in one of his children that he was afraid, specifically that he feared his wife might try to poison him. That is not a casual statement. Bzz. A man doesn't say something like that without having a reason to believe it, without having seen something or heard something or felt something that led him there. What that something was, and whether anyone who heard it took it seriously enough, would become one of the most haunting threads of the entire investigation. You might be wondering right now whether it matters that someone heard that warning and didn't act on it, whether the people who knew felt responsible afterward, whether they even believed him when he said it. Those are the kinds of questions that have no clean answers, only weight. The theory that emerged from one corner of the family was blunt and specific. The logic went like this. If Gary was killed, and if the evidence could be arranged in a way that pointed to his wife as responsible, then his wife would go to prison. And if his wife went to prison, the person who had managed to direct suspicion toward her would end up with everything. The farm, the money, all of it. 4.5 to 5 million reasons to think very carefully about who stood to gain. Scott Ferris was clear about one thing. He had nothing to do with his father's death. He said it without qualification. And the weight behind those words, the way they sit differently depending on whether you believe them or not, is one of the defining tensions of this entire case. Because believing someone is innocent and knowing they're innocent are two very different things. And in a case where every path leads back to the same small group of people, those distinctions matter enormously. The way the blame moved in the Ferris case was almost mechanical. Someone pointed in one direction, and then someone else pointed back. Another person redirected the suspicion toward a different family member, and then the first person countered, and the whole thing kept turning. The family themselves later described it as a Ferris wheel, and that image captures something real. A Ferris wheel doesn't go anywhere. It moves and turns and lifts and drops, but when it's done, it returns to where it started. Every accusation in this case came back around. Every finger pointed eventually reversed action. The motion was constant, but the destination never changed. What does that do to a family over time? Think about that for a moment. Not just the grief of losing someone, which would be enough on its own, but living inside a situation where the people you are supposed to mourn with are the same people you have been taught to suspect. Where holidays and phone calls and ordinary moments all carry the question underneath them that no one wants to ask out loud. The Ferris family didn't just lose Gary. They lost the ability to simply be family to each other without that loss becoming something darker. There's a version of this story that people want to believe where the answer is obvious and the guilty party is a stranger to decency, someone easily separated from the rest of the family. That version would make things simpler. It would let most of the Ferris family off the hook emotionally, would let the people watching from the outside feel certain. But certainty is not something this case offers easily. The reality is messier than any clean narrative allows. There were people in this family who were angry enough to act, who had financial reasons to want Gary gone, who had personal wounds deep enough to push someone over the edge. More than one person fits that description. And that is the kind of thing that keeps a case like this alive long after the immediate facts have been established. One of the things that makes the Ferris case so difficult to process is that Gary himself was apparently not a villain. He was described as beloved. He was Big Daddy. He was the patriarch. He was the one people gathered around, and yet the very position he occupied, the center of a family with that much wealth, that much hidden resentment, that much unspoken damage, made him a target. Not because of anything he did, but because of what he represented. What he held, what would pass to someone else once he was no longer there to hold it. That's a particular kind of tragedy. Not the kind where someone is punished for their actions, but the kind where someone is punished simply for existing at the center of things. For being the person the money and the power and the fear all attach themselves to. The farm didn't look dangerous. That's worth saying again. From the road, driving past, it would have looked like stability, big, like the kind of life that takes generations to build and holds together through hard work and loyalty. From the inside, the reality had been different for a long time. Long enough that the people living inside it had stopped noticing how far the outside picture was from the truth. They had grown so accustomed to the gap that they no longer felt it the way an outsider might. That happens in families. The longer you live inside something, the harder it becomes to see it clearly. The normal becomes invisible, even when the normal is deeply wrong. Some of the Ferris family members would later reflect that a lot of what had happened over the years had been swept under the rug. That phrase carries more meaning in this context than it usually does, because sweeping things under the rug assumes the rug will hold. It assumes that what's underneath stays underneath. In the Ferris case, the rug had been covering things for long enough that when it was finally lifted, what was underneath had been building pressure for years. There's no comfortable way to sit with a case like this. There's no angle from which it looks simple or resolved in any satisfying way. Even after the investigation, even after the facts were laid out, the fundamental question of what really drives a family to this point doesn't have a clean answer. Was it the money? Was it the years of infidelity and the damage that does to a marriage and a household? Was it the jealousy that had been allowed to fester without anyone naming it directly? Was it the warning Gary gave that wasn't taken seriously enough? The fear he expressed to his own child that didn't produce a response fast enough to save him? Or was it all of those things together, compounding over years, until the pressure inside that 10-acre farm became something that couldn't be contained anymore? The truth about families, the uncomfortable truth that most people already sense but rarely say out loud, is that the people who know us best are also the people most capable of hurting us. Not because they are worse than strangers, but because they know exactly where the vulnerable places are. They've been in the room for the moments of weakness. They know what we're afraid of. They know what we want. And in families where that knowledge is paired with resentment and secrecy and enough money to matter, the combination can become genuinely dangerous. Gary Ferris built something real on that farm. He became Big Daddy. He created a life that, from the outside, looked like success and stability. And the people who should have been able to mourn him without suspicion found themselves unable to, because the thing he had built, the family itself, had become the very thing that swallowed him. By the time Scott Ferris made that 911 call on July 5th, 2018, Gary had already been gone for 2 days. 2 days during which the farm had sat quiet and the absence had been growing. 2 days during which whoever knew what had happened had been living inside that knowledge, waking up with it, carrying it through each hour. 2 days between a man's death and the moment his son picked up a phone and said, out loud, that something was really off. What happens inside a person during those 2 days is something only they can describe. What it looks like to move through a house where something terrible has occurred, to sit at a table, to watch the sun go down, and carry the weight of what you know. Whether it's the weight of guilt, or the weight of grief, or the weight of suspicion falling on people you love, or some combination of all three, those 2 days are the part of this story that no formal investigation can fully reach. The Ferris case never let go of the image it had established in the beginning. The spinning wheel. The blame that kept moving, that circled back. that never stopped long enough to point clearly at just one direction. Families that carry this much damage underneath a functioning surface are more common than most people want to admit. Most of them never produce a body on a farm. Most of them manage to keep the wheel spinning without it flying apart entirely. But the conditions that created the Ferris situation, the wealth, the hidden affairs, the fear, the jealousy, the warnings left unheeded, those conditions exist in ordinary places, in families that look from the outside exactly like the Ferris farm looked from the road. Gary Ferris was buried, so his family continued, fractured and changed. The accusations kept turning long after the immediate investigation moved forward. And the farm in Cherokee County, those 10 acres that were supposed to represent everything a family could build together, stood as the place where the gap between how things look and how things actually are became impossible to ignore. Not every case offers a clean ending, mused him. Not every investigation arrives at a single answer that satisfies every question. The Ferris case left behind something more complicated than a verdict. It left behind the image of a family that had everything on paper and nothing they could hold on to once the surface was broken. It left behind a man called Big Daddy who apparently saw danger coming and told someone, and it wasn't enough. And it left behind a wheel still turning in the minds of everyone who knows this story, in the unresolved silences between the people who were there. The kind of thing that doesn't stop spinning just because the investigation ends.